The Nightmare on Elm Street franchise breathed new life into the slowly declining slasher genre and brought something new to horror, something we didn't know we needed. We got a new type of serial killer who had supernatural abilities and haunted our dreams, which meant anything goes. We were now no longer restricted to real-world scenarios. Instead, Freddy took us to the darkest corners of our deepest fears, with the ability to kill us without our flesh being present. Welcome, fellow Stardust. My name is DeRay, aka Rainbow Fright, and thank you for joining me today as I rank each installment of A Nightmare on Elm Street, a franchise that had some misses but overall gave us nightmare fuel. It's saddening to think that Freddy almost never made it to the big screen for two main reasons. First, Wes never intended on becoming a horror filmmaker. But after the success of his first feature film, Last House on the Left, it seemed as though his fate was inevitable. Horror fans wanted more depravity from him, so after failed attempts to write and produce non-horror films, he then wrote and directed his second feature film, The Hills Have Eyes, a cult classic. In the 1980s, his following horror films weren't as successful as his first two, but he had a script that he knew would turn things around for him, but nobody was biting. Disney wanted the violence toned down, Paramount said that the script was too similar to their film Dreamscape, and Universal said it didn't excite them enough. Things started to look up when New Line Cinema agreed to fund the film, but at the time, New Line Cinema was only a small distribution company who hadn't had much experience in producing films. In fact, at one point, the cast and crew didn't get paid for 2 weeks, but luckily the team was eventually able to secure the funds to produce the film, whose original budget was $700,000, but $1.1 million was spent, half of which was paid for by, quote, a Yugoslavian guy who had a girlfriend he wanted in the movies. New Line Cinema founder Bob Shaye put everything he had on the line for A Nightmare on Elm Street, including a mortgage on his home, his life savings, and his blood, sweat, and tears as a producer. In exchange, Wes signed away the rights of Freddy's character to Bob Shaye. With no interest in making a sequel or a franchise, Wes thought this was a great deal in order to get his script off the page. But as we know, Bob Shaye went on to produce 8 more films featuring Freddy Krueger. Wes was only involved in 2 of those films, making that a total of 3 films in the franchise. Wes was approached about most of the films to either direct or write, but he would either reject directing because of the script, or they rejected his script in favor of another direction. However, he wasn't approached about the 2010 remake, which he expresses his disappointment over. Luckily, Bob Shaye didn't lose his house and life savings because A Nightmare on Elm Street was a hit at the box office, grossing $57 million worldwide. After that, the rest is history, and New Line Cinema became known as the house that Freddy built. Despite Wes not being involved in every single film, the central theme remained the same for most of the entries. They were all focused on trauma, more specifically trauma within a family dynamic. This is the common theme in most of Wes's work, like The Hills Have Eyes, The People Under the Stairs, and Scream. This stems from his own childhood trauma, growing up in a strict and repressive Baptist household with a father who he admits being afraid of. With the exception of the sequel, Bob Shaye was smart in ensuring that this theme was carried out throughout the franchise when deciding on what scripts to shoot. However, Freddy's character seemed to get more goofy, which still attracted fans of comedy horror. Let's get into my ranking, starting with the worst film, working our way up to my favorite entry. Are you ready? Buckle up. 1, 2, Freddy's coming for you. 9th place easily goes to the 2010 remake. For me, a failed attempt at creating an updated version of a beloved icon. Instead of featuring Freddy as the killer, this movie would have done much better had the characters been haunted by a curse and killed in their dreams by the thing that they fear the most, similar to this year's Fear, or even Smile and It Follows, all of which were released after the remake. What I did like is the fact that the filmmakers wanted to take Freddy back to his darker roots and made him more menacing and less comical, something Wes I'm sure appreciated since he didn't particularly like the funny man direction the franchise took. The very first scene immediately sets the tone and is successful in making us believe we're about to get something spectacular. It's terrifying and disturbing. Jackie Earle Haley is introduced as the new Freddy, with a one-liner sporting special effects makeup that looks a bit more realistic than past masks. On the other hand, they probably could have done without using CGI on the mask, and it was difficult to see into his eyes. Looking into Freddy's beady eyes is so much of the thrill. Producers Brad Fuller and Andrew Form also wanted to make sure that they brought elements from the entire franchise, like they did with the Friday the 13th remake. Speaking of remakes, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre remake kept creeping into my mind when watching this movie in terms of style, tone, and gore. Sure enough, Fuller and Form, also producers of the TCM remake, compare these two films themselves, but instead see A Nightmare on Elm Street as a reimagining versus a remake. Seeing the updated wall gag was fun, the pharmacy dream sequence is memorable, and I enjoyed the addition of the micronaps. Our new Freddy wasn't a bad villain, just not who we remember from the original film. The change of personality for a beloved character after 8 movies took the reimagining a bit too far. Despite a general consensus in the horror community that this was a major miss, it's the second highest grossing remake after Friday the 13th and the second highest grossing in the Freddy franchise. 3, 4, better lock your door. Coming in at number 8 is A Nightmare on Elm Street 5, The Dream Child. This entry opens similarly to the previous film, Dream Master, with the dream sequence with our final girl. Even though the 4th and 5th installments were completely different movies, Dream Child felt like a repeat of Dream Master in some ways, which I didn't appreciate. I thought the stop-motion animation was a creative addition. Greta's death at the dinner party is disgusting in all the right ways, and Mark getting sucked into the comic book reminds me of Alice getting sucked into the movie theater screen. Both are just really fun. And kudos to the writers who let another black character survive till the end, a rarity in film, especially in the 80s. Learning more about Freddy's origin story gives his character a little more depth and almost makes you feel sorry for Freddy. It becomes frustrating when we have a repeat chain of events with our protagonist, Alice, and nobody is listening to her warning about Freddy. Not even her dad. After the events that happened in the last entry, the whole town would have known what happened and stayed on high alert for another Freddy showdown. But instead, everyone acted like Alice and Dan were crazy. Being released less than a year after the previous installment, Dream Child was the least successful entry in the franchise at the time, with a budget of $8 million grossing only $22.1 million. 5, 6, grab a crucifix. The film that takes the 7th position is Freddy's Revenge. It's a bit lower on the list for several reasons. But before I dive into those reasons, I want to first show my appreciation for this movie and what it has done for the LGBTQ+ community. The writer of Freddy's Revenge, David Chaskin, intentionally added gay subtext to the story without telling anyone, including the director, and denied doing so up until very recently. The lead, Jesse, played by Mark Patton, was a quickly rising star and a closeted gay man. So once people started noticing and talking about the gay undertones, he quickly faded into the shadows. Check out the documentary Scream Queens that goes into detail about the making and aftermath of Freddy's Revenge. Despite the turmoil Mark went through, he has since accepted the film and has learned to love the effect it's had on the LGBTQ community. They feel represented in horror and in a good way. We also had some really amazing transformation effects. Freddy emerging from Jesse's torso was really well done. I also loved when Lisa saw ants crawling all over her wound. But this was another entry that didn't really feel like a Freddy Krueger movie. This was something else with Freddy's name and face on it. We no longer escape to dream sequences and instead have Freddy running around like a mortal, hardly looking threatening. There were moments when Freddy was dark and frightening. For instance, during Jesse's second dream by the staircase.
I've got the body.
But overall, the story doesn't excite me and neither does Freddy, especially since we hardly see him in the movie. As mentioned before, the theme shifts in this installment from trauma to accepting one's true identity. Even though David Chaskin had intended on making this a homophobic story, with the message of repress your gay identity or become a serial killer monster, it eventually evolved into a homoerotic story that encouraged one to come into their own and being proud of who they are. So the joke is on David. Wes turned down the opportunity to direct the sequel because he didn't like the script, especially the exploding parakeet, but he did suggest that they shift the focus from mainly being on Jesse to balancing it more between him and Lisa, his love interest. So the filmmakers then put a little more emphasis on Lisa's character. Even though the film received mixed and bad reviews, it was a hit at the box office, and its success paved the way for the third film. 7, 8, gonna stay up late. Next up at number 6 is Freddy vs. Jason. This one is a bit higher on my list than I thought it would be. We have two worlds colliding and end up with a silly good time and great gory kills. This was something producers of both franchises wanted to do in the 80s, but they couldn't come to an agreement on several things. But over 2 decades later, they were able to work through their differences and gave us Ronnie Yu's Freddy vs. Jason. Ronnie had previously directed Bride of Chucky. Wes also chose to not direct this installment, as well as Rob Zombie, who was busy with House of a Thousand Corpses. This was Robert Englund's last appearance as Freddy. Had it been anybody else, the film wouldn't have been as successful as it was. Robert Englund went out with a bang in this bloodfest and really makes the film, even though he didn't do a lot of the slaughtering. In the director's eyes, and in my eyes, Freddy won. Unfortunately, the dialogue didn't age well in this one, given the derogatory terms sprinkled throughout, one of which is spouted by Kelly Rowland, who easily gives the best performance. The campiness is over the top, which I feel is well suited for a crossover movie like this. It doesn't take itself too seriously. Our battle between Freddy and Jason isn't until the very end, but it's well worth the wait. Understandably, Freddy vs. Jason is the highest grossing film for both franchises. What Freddy or Jason fan wouldn't want to see their favorite serial killer battle their rival? 9, 10, never sleep again. At number 5 is A Nightmare on Elm Street 4, The Dream Master. Producers approached Wes about writing this installment, but when he gave them his script, they rejected it, claiming it was too illogical and expensive. But years later, Wes would get the film produced, and it was titled Wes Craven's New Nightmare. Producers Bob Shea, Sarah Risher, and Rachel Talalay instead went with another script called Dream Master, and they even asked Wes to do rewrites of the script, which he rejected with annoyance. This would be the last time Wes was involved in the franchise, with the exception of New Nightmare. We opened the movie with another heavy metal song like we did in the previous film, Dream Warriors, but this time we have a female lead singer, Tuesday Knight, who was also the star of the film. She replaced Patricia Arquette, who played Kristen, while everyone else who survived in the third movie reprised their roles. Even though we grew to love these characters, they're killed off very early in the film, which likely contributed to the film's success, because we immediately are getting kill after kill after kill. After the OG characters are murdered, Freddy goes right into killing his fresh meat. This entry does a really good job with giving us surreal moments that make us pause and rethink what we're looking at exactly. The cockroach transformation is one of my favorite kills in the entire series, and Alice being sucked into the movie screen at the movie theater is one of my favorite moments in the franchise. It was so beautifully done and was a sweet homage to the art of cinema. The applause the audience gives her is haunting. Alice has the biggest arc of any character in the franchise, which is fun to watch. She grows from a meek and timid bystander to a proactive and vocal fighter. She removes the photos from her dresser mirror, slowly revealing her reflection, which she purposely covered up. But as she starts to come into her own, she's okay with seeing her reflection, which is a metaphor for her finally accepting and even liking who she's becoming. a confident, strong woman. The photos are also a cute callback to the original film. Dream Master also unfortunately gives us one of the worst kills, which is Rick's kill in the martial arts dojo. He was supposed to die in the elevator, but it was going to cost the producers too much money, so they instead had him kicking and punching an invisible Freddy. Even though this movie received mixed and average reviews, it was the highest grossing installment until Freddy vs. Jason's release, and is now the third highest grossing after the remake. It's also one of the most successful independent films. Director Renny Harlin got the job after hanging around the studio every day, when finally the producers gave in and let him direct because he was persistent and fit their budget. Renny went the superhero direction, which is why audiences will find themselves rooting for Freddy with this one. Renny would go on to direct Cliffhanger, Die Hard 2, and The Long Kiss Goodnight.
Freddy's dead.
The number 4 slot goes to Freddy's Dead, The Final Nightmare. I know. Not the typical placement for this movie, but as a 90s kid, I have a soft spot for 90s TV and film, and this movie screams 90s. Peter Jackson was asked to write a screenplay, but the producers ultimately went with Rachel Talala's story, who was now in the director's chair. Michael DeLuca would end up writing the screenplay. Rachel Talala produced most of the films in the franchise up until Freddy's Dead, and was an assistant production manager on the first film, and moved up to production manager for Freddy's Revenge. Her rise to the director's chair is inspiring to see. Although Peter Jackson didn't get his big break with the Freddy franchise, his efforts got him recognized, which opened the door for Dead Alive, a cult classic, The Frighteners, and of course, Lord of the Rings. As insinuated by the title, this was meant to be the final film in the franchise, since New Line Cinema was getting busy with their other newer franchises, like Critters and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. The vibe this time around was again campy, cartoonish, and inspired by Twin Peaks, which was in its second season at the time of the movie's release. The tone isn't much different from previous installments though. The comedy and dark humor is there, and we again have this theme of trauma. Freddy might seem over-the-top goofy, but I interpret this as his pure joy and excitement for being able to finally kill again. It's been years since he was able to satiate his thirst for blood, and now he's finally able to do what he does best. We get some really great special effects and 2 more of my favorite kills in this franchise. The first being when Spencer is sucked into the video game, much like the comic book kill in Dream Child, and Carlos's death with his hearing aid, which was especially masterful with the Scanner's style head explosion. I felt every second of Carlos's demise. Seeing Freddy do his finger chop gag from the first film in the quote-unquote final chapter was such a good move, and him doing it by counting the ways the protagonists have tried to kill him was brilliant. Since the first film, Johnny Depp had blown up to be a mega Hollywood star, especially after Edward Scissorhands and Crybaby, which Rachel was a producer on. Rachel actually brought much of the crew from Crybaby over to the set of Freddy's Dead, and even got Johnny Depp to do a cameo, which for her feature directorial debut was huge. Also, the entire cast gave excellent performances. Freddy's Dead ended up having the highest grossing opening weekend until the release of Freddy vs. Jason, and right now is the 5th highest grossing film in the franchise. There was a ton of marketing surrounding this movie, including a mock funeral for Freddy himself, which was attended by many of the cast members from the entire franchise. Making it to number 3 is A Nightmare on Elm Street 3, Dream Warriors, the true sequel to the original film. We even get back Heather Langenkamp, who gives us the Nancy we fell in love with. She's still a fighter with immense passion. The film jumps right into a dream sequence after the opening credits, just like we did in the original film. And we're introduced to our new final girl, Kristen, played by Patricia Arquette. With our previous knowledge of Freddy, we already know that the stakes are high for Kristen. Kristen and her friends, who are in a psychiatric hospital because they keep having dreams about Freddy, are haunted by him. They are the last of the children whose parents burned Freddy alive because he murdered children. Nancy, having gone through the same thing, is a therapist intern and attempts to help the kids. The group discovers their dream abilities and use these to defeat Freddy. Even though Wes had no intention of making Freddy a franchise, he agreed to write Dream Warriors and was an executive producer because Freddy's Revenge did so poorly. He ended up with a co-writing credit after his writing partner, Bruce Wagner, made it a bit lighter at the request of Rachel Talalay. He also would have directed Dream Warriors, but he was busy directing his film Deadly Friend.
In fairness to the other participated, Frank Darabont and his partner, they did some great stuff to it.
I give Chuck complete credit for what happened with the script in Nightmare 3, he and Frank Darabont.
We get more of the best kills in the franchise with Taryn's death with the syringes and Philip's fall from the roof. The popular one-liner, "Welcome to primetime, bitch," was improvised by Robert Englund and is an iconic moment in horror. Freddy's shape-shifting abilities are taken up several notches from the original, so this time around, really anything goes. Even a giant Freddy snake that can swallow you whole. The effects and use of practicals were some of the best in the franchise, and a lot of them still hold up today. The effects were difficult for the crew to pull off, so they were always behind schedule, but it definitely paid off in the end. We also got to explore more of Freddy's world, which was nightmarish and hellish. The boiler room in which he killed his child victims was now a massive gravesite, where you could see bones in every corner. The dark imagery and the dark humor in Dream Warriors really made for a fun, yet enjoyable disturbing experience. Since Wes was unable to direct, the job was given to new director Chuck Russell. Despite being difficult to work with, his directorial feature debut was a huge success, and he would go on to direct the Blob remake, The Mask, and The Scorpion King. Dream Warriors earned $8.9 million its opening weekend, a record high for an indie film at the time, and it's still one of the franchise's highest grossing installments. This was also the first movie to have included a music video as part of the extras that were included when purchasing the VHS or DVD. The song Dream Warriors is written and performed by Dokken, a heavy metal band, and has become a song loved by many Freddy fans. After the use of this song and Dokken's Into the Fire, the filmmakers decided that from now on, the franchise would feature heavy metal music.
Miss me.
The runner-up position goes to Wes Craven's New Nightmare, the 7th of 9 films, the only other installment that Wes wrote and directed. He also served as an executive producer. New Nightmare is a standalone film that pulls Freddy from the script and into the real world. And Freddy isn't quite Freddy this time. He's an evil entity. Even though Freddy was supposed to have died, Bob Shaye and Sarah Risher were game for another opportunity to make more money. Each installment brought in a profit, so why not? But this time, Wes brought along with him his longtime producing partner, Marianne Magdalena. This was the first film that Rachel Talalay wasn't involved in. We get the return of several characters from the original movie, including Heather Langenkamp, John Saxon, and Robert Englund playing themselves. Robert Englund also, of course, plays Freddy Krueger in the film. Wes, also playing himself, asks Heather to help him on his next Freddy movie. He explains that an ancient evil entity can escape the confines of a story for many reasons. Among them are when a franchise has ended, and when stories or the monsters in the stories have been made less evil or threatening. Just like the remake, Wes aimed to bring Freddy back to his darker roots and make him feared as a vicious killer again. The meta approach is something we see Wes do again with the Scream franchise, especially in the 3rd installment. In order to keep the evil entity at bay, Heather would have to step into the role of Nancy one last time to put Freddy where he belongs. Because Freddy is actually possessed by a demon, he looks like a demon instead of a human who's been burned. He no longer has his brown eyes, but instead, they're cold and white. His mask is now less human-looking, even though the skin looks like human flesh with exposed muscle tendon underneath. Compared to the original mask, it has a more witchy look similar to the mask in Freddy's Revenge. It was cool for the most part, but I definitely prefer the original mask. In New Nightmare, it wasn't wet and gross looking enough, but I did like Freddy's new set of knives, which is now a part of him, instead of a detachable glove. It makes sense as an evil demon who can shapeshift, just like Freddy. And the addition of the black trench coat is an interesting one. I guess the demon was a bit too chilly here on mortal Earth. What's interesting about the script is that it mimicked Heather Langenkamp's real life quite a bit. She is in fact married to a special effects studio owner and had a stalker who would call her and send her letters in the mail. She had to flee to London for a few months before they apprehended the culprit. There were so many elements that were brought over from the first film. Here are a few. Dylan wearing pajamas in the final battle with Freddy. Tina's ceiling death, which also utilized a rotating room, and the sticky staircases. This was actually Bob Shaye's idea for the first film, but Wes wasn't that into it, so he let Bob Shaye direct that scene, although it went uncredited. It's cool to see that Wes brought it back for his final Freddy movie, as it was an effective visual for the audience for many installments in the franchise. Despite how genius this entry into the franchise was, it did the poorest at the box office, with a budget of $8 million and only grossing $19.8 million. However, it received great reviews from both critics and audiences, and is even praised as one of the best films in the entire franchise, if not the best. The late and great Wes explained that a film like this, that required more thought, was made more for those who made the films, i.e. the adults, and Scream was made for the audience. For some viewers, there was too much story to follow, and it just didn't come across as scary. But again, as a huge fan of 90s film, I just love this one as it has that familiar 90s vibe going for it. Watching the script get typed up as Wes and Heather are having their conversation is just too cool.
I'm your boyfriend now, Nancy.
The #1 spot goes to none other than the OG itself, A Nightmare on Elm Street 1984, the one that carved a new path for slasher horror films, the movie that made audiences afraid to fall asleep around the world. We're introduced to a villain who feeds off people's fear of him, much like Candyman. The movie begins right away with a disorienting dream sequence with our supposed lead, Tina, being chased by a man whose face we can't see, but is the same man who created the glove with knives in the opening credits. We soon realize Nancy is our true lead, and Freddy begins killing his victims one by one. Like Nancy, the viewers are eager to figure out Freddy's motive, which the parents seem to be keeping a secret. Even after Nancy describes the man that has been haunting her dreams and killing her friends, they do their best to silence her instead of telling her the truth. In a way, acting as pseudo-antagonists that are hurting our protagonists instead of helping them. We've essentially got a movie that is the adults versus the kids, and Freddy is the leader of the adults. In regards to this, Wes says, in a sense, Freddy stands for the worst of parenthood and adulthood. The dirty old man, the nasty father, and the adult who wants children to die rather than help them prosper. He's the boogeyman and the worst fear of children, the adult that's out to get them. He's a very primal figure, sort of like Kronos devouring his children. That evil, twisted, perverted father figure that wants to destroy and is able to get them at their most vulnerable moment, which is when they're asleep. Wes's inspiration came from a number of things. A kid named Fred Krueger used to tease him when he was young. He also used the kid's name in Last House on the Left with the character Krug. Also when he was a child, he heard a noise outside his bedroom window, and when he went to inspect it, he saw an elderly man who stared back at him and seemed to revel in frightening Wes. As an adult, when coming up with the inspiration for his next script, he recalled multiple articles he read that described refugees from Laos, Cambodia, and Vietnam who were afraid to sleep because people were dying in the middle of their nightmares. The phenomenon was dubbed Asian Death Syndrome, or Sudden Unexplained Death Syndrome. He found it strange that these articles didn't reference one another and were treated as the only case of such a death.
Literally before they got to him, he fell still and he was dead. In the aftermath, the parents found all the sleeping pills. He had not taken them, he had hidden them in the bed.
And as for Freddy's sweater, he wanted something that would stand out and quickly be identifiable as Freddy. He read that green and red were harsh on the eye when next to each other, and decided on a green and red striped sweater for Freddy. As a shapeshifter, seeing these stripes make him easily recognizable. In spite of Wes not liking the more comedic tone the rest of the franchise took, there were some moments with Freddy where you can't help but chuckle or crack a smile. After the third film, Dream Warriors, it seemed as though after some intentional laughs were thrown into the script with lines from Kincaid, Joey, and Freddy, that was the direction Bob Shaye and Sarah Risher wanted to go. Besides, this was a time when comedy horror really started to take off as a popular subgenre. The original Nightmare on Elm Street gave us a really tough final girl who wasn't putting up with anyone's not even her mother's. Not once does Nancy waver in her mission to take down the boogeyman, who's been picking off her friends one by one. She's fierce and passionate, even if everything and everybody is working against her. She's intelligent, and we're happy to see her make it all the way till the end. Sorta. Her chemistry with Freddy was a perfect match. We had light and dark going head to head throughout the entire movie. In some of Freddy's kills, you can hear his grunts without seeing him on screen, which added to the terror of his presence. The surreal aspects were done with an ease that allowed us to slip between reality and the dream world seamlessly, and sometimes left us unsure as to which world we were actually in. A Nightmare on Elm Street is a movie that continues to win over new audiences and is a comfort movie for many horror lovers. Let me know in the comments what your ranking of this franchise is. I have a feeling not many people will be agreeing with some of my picks. Well, thank you again for joining me today, fellow Stardust. I appreciate you being here with me. I'll be back later this month with more videos. So if you haven't already, go ahead and hit the subscribe button and notification bell. That way, you'll get notified every time I upload a new video. And if you liked this video, please hit the like button and share it with a friend. I hope I see you next time. Peace.